That's a question I find myself asking more often these days when I look at Salesforce environments. Not whether the system works, not whether the implementation was delivered on time, not even whether users are logging in or not. The question is much simpler than that. How much effort does it actually take for somebody to do their job? It sounds like an obvious question, yet surprisingly few organizations ever stop to ask it. Instead, they focus on the bigger, more visible measures of success. They look at project delivery dates, license utilization, automation statistics, and system uptime. Those things are certainly important, but they often distract attention away from something far more influential, the day-to-day experience of the people using the system. Because the truth is that most sales environments do not struggle because of one catastrophic decision. They struggle through accumulation. They struggle because small inefficiencies are introduced over time, and those inefficiencies slowly become accepted as normal. A field gets added here. An approval step gets introduced. The screen becomes a little bit busier. A process takes a few seconds longer than it did 6 months ago. Nobody notices because each individual change feels like it's insignificant. The problem is that insignificant things rarely stay insignificant when they are repeated hundreds or thousands of times every single day. Imagine a sales rep logging customer interactions. Perhaps the process takes 30 seconds longer than it should because information is spread across multiple tabs, or because there are fields that needed to be completed that provide actually very little real value. 30 seconds sounds trivial. In fact, if you raise this issue in any of the project meetings, it will probably be dismissed immediately. 30 seconds is hardly a business problem. But organizations do not operate at the level of one single interaction. They operate at scale. A sales team of 100 people logging 10 activities per day create 1,000 interactions every single day. And suddenly, those 30 seconds become more than 8 hours of lost productivity every day, every week, every month. Over the course of a year, that tiny inefficiency has consumed hundreds of hours of working time. Not because anybody made a terrible decision, but because nobody paid attention to a small one. Now let's look at another scenario. Imagine a growing organization that's invested heavily in Salesforce over the last 5 years. The implementation was a success. Users adopted the platform, reporting improved, leadership gained visibility they never had before. And on paper, everything looks positive. During those 5 years, however, the business continued to evolve. New products were introduced, new departments joined the platform, different managers requested different information, compliance requirements changed, reporting needs expanded. Each time a request appeared, a sensible decision was made. We'll just add another field. We'll just add another status. We'll just add another approval, or we'll just add another section to the page. None of those decisions were wrong. In fact, many of them were probably entirely justified. The challenge only becomes visible when somebody compares today's experience with experience users had 5 years earlier. What once required maybe 5 pieces of information now requires 15. What once took 2 screens might now take 5 or 6. What once felt intuitive now requires explanation. The organization hasn't experienced one large problem. Instead, it accumulated hundreds of small ones. And because accumulation happens gradually, nobody really noticed. And I think this is one of the biggest hidden risks in mature Salesforce environments. Organizations become so focused on adding value that they rarely stop to ask whether they are also adding friction. Growth introduces complexity. Complexity introduces effort. Effort introduces resistance. And resistance eventually impacts behavior. That behavior is where things become particularly interesting. Now let's explore another scenario. Imagine 2 sales reps who both leave a customer meeting at exactly the same time. They both need to update Salesforce before moving on to their next appointment. The first rep opens Salesforce, enters a few updates, completes the required fields, and moves on to the next call. The process probably takes about 2 minutes. It's simple, feels reasonable. The second rep faces a slightly different experience. They need to navigate multiple screens. Several fields might seem unclear. Some information feels duplicated. A few more mandatory fields appear to exist purely for reporting purposes. The process takes 6 minutes instead of 2. Now the user will complain. Now the user will raise a support ticket. Now the user tells management there's a problem. But their behavior will start to diverge. The first rep will continue updating Salesforce immediately after every meeting, because the effort feels manageable and small. The second rep starts postponing updates, maybe until later in the day or later in the week. They perhaps keep updating notes elsewhere with the intention of updating Salesforce whenever they might have a chance to do that. Eventually, some information might never make it into the system at all. When leadership reviews reports several months later, they start to see data quality issues. The temptation is to conclude that the user is the problem. Perhaps they need a bit more discipline. Perhaps they need more accountability. Perhaps they need another reminder from management. Or maybe they need some more training. But what if the real issue started months earlier with a process that simply demanded too much effort? What if the data quality problem is actually a usability problem wearing a different disguise? I think organizations often underestimate how closely behavior is linked to effort. Human beings naturally gravitate towards the path of the least resistance. We all do it every single day. If something feels easy, we repeat it. If something feels difficult, we avoid it. That principle applies whether we're exercising, managing our finances, or updating Salesforce. The challenge is that the effort is rarely measured. Business measures logins, opportunities, activities, revenue. Very few businesses measure how difficult it feels to perform those activities in the first place. And yet, that difficulty influences almost everything that follows. This is where the conversation starts moving beyond efficiency and into psychology. Every time somebody opens a Salesforce record, their brain is making a decision. They're processing information, filtering distractions, prioritizing actions, and determining what matters most. The more information presented to them, the greater the mental workload becomes. Now let's explore another final scenario. Imagine 2 account pages. The first contains only the information required for the user's role. Key details are immediately visible, the next action is obvious, the page is clean, users can quickly understand what they're looking at and what they need to do next. The second page has evolved over several years. Different teams requested additional fields, managers wanted extra reporting information, historical requirements were never really removed. The page now contains dozens and dozens of fields, multiple sections, and information relevant to people who may never even look at that record. Technically, both pages function. Technically, both pages provide information. And technically, neither page is broken. Yet the experience is entirely different. On the first page, users focus on customers. On the second page, users focus on navigating the system. That distinction matters more than many organizations realize. Because the purpose of Salesforce is not to help people use Salesforce. The purpose of Salesforce should be to help people do their job and make it easier to do their job. Whenever users spend more energy interacting with the system than serving customers, managing cases, or progressing opportunities, something has shifted out of balance. This is one of the reasons I have become increasingly interested in the concept of cognitive debt. We often hear discussions about technical debt, but cognitive debt can be just as damaging. Every unnecessary field, every confusing process, and every additional click creates a small mental burden. Individually, those burdens feel insignificant. Collectively, they can create an environment that feels exhausting to navigate. And when users become mentally exhausted, performance will suffer. Not dramatically, but gradually, quietly, and almost invisibly. Which brings us to training. Most organizations view training as an activity designed to teach users how the system works. And while that's certainly part of its purpose, I think the most valuable trainers provide something else entirely. They provide visibility. A good trainer spends hours observing users interact with the platform. We see where people hesitate. We hear the questions users repeatedly ask. We notice which processes require explanation and which ones make sense immediately. These observations are incredibly valuable because they often reveal future inefficiencies before they become embedded into daily behavior. If 20 people struggling with the same screen during training, that is not random. If multiple people ask the same question, that is not random. If people consistently take longer to complete a particular process than expected, that is not random. Those are signals. Signals that waste may be developing. Signals that the organization have an opportunity to improve the user experience before the inefficiency becomes normalized. Unfortunately, many organizations position training at the very end of a project and treat it as a tick box exercise. The system is built, training is delivered, project closes. But what if training is actually one of those powerful diagnostic tools available? What are the training rubrics where hidden inefficiencies revealed themselves for the very first time? What if trains are not just educators, but observers, translators, and early warning systems? I think there's a strong argument that we are. What fascinates me is how often businesses become obsessed with large transformation initiatives while overlooking these smaller opportunities. There's enormous excitement about artificial intelligence, automation, digital transformation. Every organization wants to become more productive, more efficient, more intelligent. Yet many businesses are simultaneously carrying thousands of tiny inefficiencies that quietly drain productivity every single day. Those inefficiencies rarely appear in strategic presentations. They rarely appear in board reports. They rarely appear in implementation reviews. But they are there, waiting, accumulating, compounding. The irony is that removing 5 minutes of daily friction from 100 users can often create more immediate value than launching an entirely new initiative. It simply lacks the excitement and visibility that organizations naturally gravitate towards. Perhaps that is why these problems persist for so long. They're too small to attract attention individually. Yet together, they become remarkably expensive. When you think about it that way, this podcast is not really about clicks at all. Clicks are simply a symbol. What we're really discussing is accumulated waste. We're talking about the hidden cost of tiny inefficiencies that slowly become embedded within an organization. We're talking about the gap between how processes are designed and how people actually work. Most importantly, we're talking about the fact that productivity is rarely lost in dramatic moments. More often, it appears quietly, few seconds at a time, until 1,000 seconds become hours, hours become weeks, and weeks become a significant business cost. The next time somebody tells you that an extra click doesn't matter, I would encourage you to challenge that assumption. One click probably doesn't matter. One additional screen probably doesn't really matter. One extra 30-second task probably doesn't really matter at all. But 1,000 clicks do matter. 1,000 moments of hesitation matter. 1,000 tiny inefficiencies matter. And some of the most expensive problems in Salesforce are not the ones we notice immediately. They're the ones we have stopped noticing altogether.